In classical object-oriented languages, we have two types of methods, instance methods and static methods. So let's see what is the difference. In this example, this draw method is what we call an instance method, because this method is available on an instance of a class, which is an object. So if we create a circle object here, new circle with radius 1, and log it on the console. So in the circle object, on this instance, we have the draw method. In contrast, we have static methods. Static methods are available on the class itself, not the object instance. We often use them to create utility functions that are not specific to a given object. For example, in the circle class, this draw is specific to a circle object. It's a particular circle object that we want to draw, right? So that's why it's an instance method. But here I can define a static method that is not tied to a particular circle object. Let's call that parse. So a parse takes a string, which is supposed to be a JSON string. It will parse it and return a new circle object. Now, to make this static, we use the static keyword on the front. And with this method will no longer be available on a circle object. So here we won't have circle.parse. It doesn't exist. Let me show you. So here in the console, circle has a radius and the draw method. The parse method is not here, but it's accessible on the class reference. So circle.parse, it's here. So with this method, we're not working with a particular circle object. We're working with the circle class itself. So to call static methods, we don't have to create an instance of a class. Now let's go ahead and implement this method. So here I'm going to use JSON.parse to parse this string. Here we get the JSON object. Assuming that this is a valid JSON object and it has a radius property, we can get that, store it in a constant, and then new up a circle object with that radius and return it. Now with this method, we don't have to create a circle object first because we don't have a circle object to start with. We have a JSON string. So we call circle.parse and pass a valid JSON object here with this key, radius. And we set the value to 1. Now this static method returns a circle object. Let's test this. So save, and here's our circle object on the console. So one more time, we use static methods to create utility functions that are not tied to a particular object. Let me show you another example. In JavaScript, we have this built-in object, math, and this object gives us a bunch of utility methods, right? Now here we're not newing up a math object. We're not doing something like this. We directly access these methods on the math object itself. So here math looks like a class. If this math object didn't exist in JavaScript and we wanted to implement it using ES6 classes, this is how we would do it. So we would define a class called math and define a bunch of static methods like ABS or absolute, which takes a value and does some magic here. We don't care about that. Then we could access this method directly on the math class itself. Now this is clashing with the built-in object in JavaScript. So let me rename this to math2. Now look, math2 dot, we have this ABS method here. So again, in this example, we're not working with a particular object. This absolute is a utility function that takes an input and returns something.